As I mentioned, Jeff will be our speaker this morning. A little bit more about him. He and his wife and family have been members of UUCJ for a number of years. They enjoy the fellowship, the friendship, the thought-provoking conversation, thought-provoking services that UUCJ and its members have to offer. Thank you, Jeff.
You know, you're supposed to begin with a joke. And I always wondered what a fruited plain was. So after the service, if you can grab me, and I'm not a nuclear physicist or whatever we need to do there, forgive me, but so think about the fruited plain. Well, welcome to this week's sermon, or is it a talk, or it's a history lesson about Veterans Day. I didn't do research, I Googled, right? And found a few facts about tomorrow's celebration. I hesitate to call it a holiday. You'd think that honoring those who served would not be mixed up with 50% off sales and 2-for-1 specials. Today, for those of you, I don't know if there's any Marines here, today is Marine Corps birthday. And legend has it, my father was a Marine officer, and legend has it that the Marines arranged for Veterans Day, then Armistice Day, to be the day after their birthday celebration so they could have the day off and recover, I think. So just a few facts. The 11th hour of the 11th day of the 11th month, right, was originally called Armistice Day, as you saw Cal, for the youth, in the U.S. It commemorated the delayed end to the war, to World War I in 1918. Remember, the war to end all wars. We didn't seem to follow that. You know, it wasn't until 1954, again, as Cal pointed out, that President Eisenhower, also a veteran of some renown, renamed that day to its current title of merely Veterans Day. There's no apostrophe in Veterans Day. It doesn't belong to the veterans. Veterans modifies the day. It's a linguistic thing. For a while, in the 60s, remember we went through the paroxysm of Monday holidays? All holidays had to be on a Monday, so we always had a 3-day weekend. It was a Monday holiday, but then in the 70s, it was returned to November 11th, and only November 11th, taking unique pride of place along with Christmas, New Year's Day, and July 4th, which is our Independence Day, in our holiday pantheon. Even the somber Memorial Day is a Monday holiday these days. Veterans Day is not about those who died in service. That is Memorial Day. Veterans Day is about those who are living and have served. Originally, it was thought of as honoring only those service members who served in combat. It's now considered to honor all members who have served. We have about 16.5 million veterans in the United States. Some of them, quite a few of them, here in our congregation. Some veterans were draftees. Some followed a long family tradition of military service, and some merely felt called to serve. And some might have been otherwise unemployable and went to the military for their jobs. But if they served, they're veterans. And when it came down to why they were serving, many, if not most veterans, say they're there for the guy next to them or the gal next to them. And at a very basic level, they didn't want to let down their buddies, in war or peace. On Veterans Day, we have parades where the active duty gets to put on their dress uniforms and go march on their day off. Just one good deal after another to be an active duty soldier. You'll see veterans in the parade, as well as these guys, and they're honoring the veterans, which they will become later on. And right now, we have about 2 million members on active duty in the reserves and in the various National Guards. While the National Guard units belong to the states, Florida National Guard, Georgia, and so forth, they can be mobilized, if necessary, by the national command authorities. We should have something coming up. I don't know if you can read that very well, but that's from some reservists who weren't really happy about it says 2 weeks a month, my foot, or something like that, another part of the anatomy. That was from Iraq. Some pundits have lamented the lack of veterans serving in Congress or other legislative or other executive branches, But the number's increasing. There's no qualification for office in the Constitution that mentions military service. But I think it's useful to have some veterans in office. I'm a veteran. I was in the Navy, as Penny pointed out, but my active duty service was between Vietnam and the Gulf War. I'm a Cold Warrior, if you want to label my service. We went to sea on aircraft carriers, I flew helicopters, and there was always that Soviet ship tailing us, sometimes with its little radars tracking the ship so that its missiles would accurately find the ship. The helicopters were supposed to intercede between the missile and the ship, and I really don't know how that worked. I finished my career as a reservist, if you can call a reserve career, that's a crazy term, isn't it? And I finished it shortly after the global war on terror began in 2001. There's one group that served overseas that is really close to my heart. It's been in existence since the 60s, along with, say, the Green Berets and other groups under John Kennedy, then President John Kennedy's interest. He liked the idea of these small units that were highly trained. These members of this unit trained specifically for their missions. They learned languages, they learned cultural norms and unique skills for their eventual assignments. They were often sent to far-off places, quite often by themselves, with little support from the embassy or the US government. In case of widespread unrest or civil disobedience or war, they were told to get back to the embassy the best they could, and good luck. Upon completion of their service, many of them returned home with substance abuse problems, psychological challenges, and illnesses, all vestiges and memories of their time in the bush. Often they received little government-supported care after this service, but most felt the work they did was worthwhile and fulfilling. Look at those boys, they're pretty tough, aren't they? As a military member, we trained to destroy the enemy. That was our job. We also trained, as helicopter pilots, to rescue our comrades. And sometimes we rescued the enemies, or just some unfortunate souls who were in extremis. The helicopter, my choice of flying machine, has been used for decades in many missions, in war and in peace. If you want to read some really crazy stories about helicopter flying, look at the Vietnam period, when the helicopter came into its own as part of the infantry, as a troop carrier, as a gunship, and also as a rescue and extraction aircraft. I'm sorry, I'm a helicopter guy, I gotta quit that. Okay, good. In the Greek play, Lysistrata, the women, you probably all know this, go on a matrimonial strike against their husbands in an effort to end the Peloponnesian War. Remember that went on for like 300 years? Now, it was sort of a sardonic, sarcastic, silly play, but the point is kind of well made. Maybe these Greek women recognized the best way to serve was by stopping war altogether. Now, today, of our veterans, we have about 2 million who are women. As you can see, that young lady kind of facing us with the sunglasses on is my niece, Major Sophie Funderburk. She was in charge of a smallish 225-member group that went to Saudi Arabia on a regular rotation back in 2021. Women have served both in direct combat, and she's a logistics officer. Women have served both in direct combat and in support roles throughout the history of the United States. And just women have always been there. You know, we often think of women veterans primarily for their roles as medical caregivers, like the nurses depicted in the Vietnam Women's Memorial, which is heart-wrenchingly beautiful. If you've ever been to Washington, you have the Veterans Memorial Wall over here, and over here under small copse of trees is this stunning statue. Sorry, it's tough. But the contributions of U.S. women during war are not limited to medical care, as you can see. Indeed, the policy of preventing 50% of our population from unrestricted military service doesn't seem like such a good idea anymore. Since 1983, direct combat positions have been open to women, and the number of specialties who can engage in direct combat has been expanded over the last 4 decades, with women acquitting themselves with valor and leadership. In Iraq, early on in the war, a 23-year-old military policewoman, Leanne Hester, was awarded the Silver Star for her heroic actions when the convoy she was guarding was attacked. Another member was awarded the Silver Star, and another member of her group was awarded the Distinguished Service Cross, our second highest medal. That's the young lady there. Of course, in today's battlefield, there's no real front. And the battle lines shift. You don't know where the enemy is. And any member in the theater can become a direct combatant. The distinction between direct combat and support is irrelevant. Should be another one coming up here. And it's because of this last point. Oh, there's my niece. She went to Hamid Karzai Airport when we were evacuating at the end of our engagement in Afghanistan. She took 150 people there. She's not a happy woman there. She got out okay. Nobody in her unit was injured. There was that horrible suicide bomber that killed over 100 people, I think, and several Americans, but nobody in her unit was injured, blessedly. It's because of this last point that all veterans should be recognized on Veterans Day, because you don't know when you're going to face the enemy. Now, I never served in combat. Don't think I did. But I put on my dress uniform many times to attend memorial services for friends and acquaintances who died in peacetime. Peacetime is quite often just as dangerous. Now, the public, thank you, often recognizes our veterans with discounts on some items and other nice things in recognition of their service. When I'm offered this, I quite often ask if the establishment offers the same discounts to public school teachers. Some veterans are eligible for medical benefits from the VA, the Veterans Administration. There are VA guaranteed loans and mortgages and tuition support for colleges and professional training. When I started my career, the tuition support was really minimal and I didn't invest in it. That was fine, but it's much better now. You get better support to go to school, to go to professional schools, and to get some training. Often, unfortunately, a veteran will be left out or dropped from the rolls for no real reason other than maybe administrative oversight. Unfortunately, these make the headlines. And we can't forget the treatment some of our returning Vietnam War veterans faced in the United States. We learned from that experience, and largely veterans are well received these days. And remember, it took 50 years for the women flyers, the WASPs, the World War II WASPs, to be recognized as veterans. Yeah, they died too. Some of my veteran friends cannot speak too highly, though, of the medical care they've received from the VA programs. So, like anything else, there's good and there's bad and there's lots of stories. We try. You know, maybe we need to treat all Americans to the same quality of care we provide our veterans. Let's make it for all of us. Now, I love this picture. It's forever ago. The Paris Metro. Has anybody been to Paris and ridden their wonderful metro? It's great. In the early, was it the early 80s? Yeah, the early 80s, I happened to go to Paris. And the seats by the door of the car, right there where you get in, there were 2 or 3 seats that were easy to get into, and they were reserved in the following order. Third priority for those seats was pregnant women. Okay, that's nice. Second, blind people. First priority, in France, wounded veterans. Don't see it here. In the 60s and 70s, a commercial on TV and often on radio extolled the benefit of hiring veterans. Remember that? Your best bet, hire a vet. In many ways, that is a good vet. Veterans show up. They show up on time. They have life skills, they take leadership positions, and they take care of their fellows. Probably the only group I'd hire ahead of them would be former camp counselors. Those kids know how to work. So let's get our boonie hats back. Pretty badass, aren't they? I mentioned a group of highly trained folks earlier in this talk. In case you're wondering, they're Peace Corps volunteers. or as we like to say upon return, veterans of foreign peace. I served as a volunteer myself before I went into the Navy. I was in Morocco teaching English as a foreign language, as a second language from 1978 to 1980. A few of our members, if I'm not mistaken, served in the Peace Corps. At the end of our service, we got a readjustment allowance of $75 a month for the time served, which was supposed to adjust to life in America. You know, luxuries like running water, sit-down toilets, and telephones. And maybe medical care, I don't remember, but I know I carried some stuff with me. So we went home with some cash in our hands. Our Peace Corps volunteers veterans. They also are VISTA volunteers from the 60s. Our Teach for America volunteers veterans. It's a good question. We talked about the other services. Bob did. All of these people served their country. And in the case of the Peace Corps volunteers, they chose to work overseas. Now, Mark Dickens hasn't been here lately. He's a retired Special Forces officer, you know, the Green Berets. He said Green Berets are Peace Corps volunteers, but with guns, when he talked about their mission. The mission of the Green Berets, remember, is to liberate the oppressed. I knew I liked him. But maybe the Peace Corps volunteers are like Special Forces, but without the berets. I don't know. A Peace Corps volunteer friend of mine went on to a career in the Foreign Service and ended up ambassador to Tunisia during the Arab Spring. Do Foreign Service officers deserve the same accord that our military veterans get? They don't get guns, and they're often in hazardous situations, as the ambassador to Libya, former Peace Corps volunteer in Morocco, Chris Stevens was when he was killed in Benghazi in 2012. During my career in the Navy, I flew helicopters. I flew those helicopters as an anti-submarine warfare and search and rescue pilot. Early on, with some hair, whatever it was, still on fire, I rode them hard and put them up wet. Actually, the helicopter was designed to land on the water. We were supposed to fly the helicopter to our datum, land on the water, and do sonar stuff. They decided that seasick pilots was a bad idea. So we didn't do that anymore, although we trained to land and take off from the water. It was really fun, thank you. Anyway, I rode them hard and put them up wet, not that wet. Other unknown, faceless people paid my fuel bills, and they purchased my spare parts. Now, that's the helicopter actually flying. Later in my service, a change came over me. I still flew like my hair was on fire, but the increased responsibilities that came with higher rank and position made me look harder at the costs of operating our aircraft. It costs real money, both for the machine and for the people who fly and support the mission. The realization that someone had to pay the bill, all those bills, made me rethink my approach to running the squadron and scrutinize the bills a little more carefully. I realized I was a servant to those people. The people who got up every day and went to work, earning money and paying taxes. I'm sure some paid grudgingly and others with rancor, but they paid the taxes that paid my bills. I owed it to them to be a good steward of their money and trust. I tried. The military doesn't give out awards for saving money. The system is designed for the units to spend all their money and ask for more, right? Rick's nodding his head. That way, and I think it's that way around the world, that way you prove the need and get even more money next year. Enough of that. I tried to walk that bouncy tightrope during my late career. You know, as a veteran, I'm often told, thank you for your service. And I try to reply, thank you for supporting it. And I thank you, to you, assembled here, thank you for supporting my service and the service of those other 16 million veterans and the 2 million on active duty. I think you got your money's worth out of me. I can't say I was just doing my job. And not everyone, it was a necessary job. And not everyone is able to make a career or even do a short enlistment in the military. Military service is hard, sometimes boring, sometimes dangerous, and sometimes drive you crazy work. I wish there was no need for the military. Maybe we need to focus on soft power, you know, talk to people. As a veteran, it's my turn to tell you, all of you, thank you. Thank you for placing your trust in me and my leadership, even if you didn't know me. Thank you for your support in every way. And if you oppose the military, if you take issue with the military, thank you. That's your right. Now, we've got a parade tomorrow. I'll see you out there.